Welcome back. In this video we're going to be starting off with the low poly and unwrapping. So I'm just going to make a new collection and move the ground plane and the ore to that collection, move it to the top of the list and hide it. Next I'm going to move all of the objects into a new folder called high poly and then delete the empty folders for ore, cart and track. So we won't be using those. Next I'm going to select everything again, duplicate with Shift D, and then I'm going to move that to a new collection called LP. This is the low poly, and I can collapse that over here and hide the high poly collection. I'm now just going to go through piece by piece and both try and either low poly it, join pieces together in a logical order for baking, and unwrap at the same time. So in edit mode I can delete all of the railway sleepers apart from one. So I can unwrap this one, and then it's just a case of duplicating it back into the right places. And from way back when we did the modelling, I still know the offset for this, so I'm just going to mark these edges as seams, select everything and unwrap, and then I can Shift D on the y-axis and then just move that along. I think it was 61 centimeters, and then Shift R to repeat, and then all those sleepers are I've got the UVs applied. So I'm just going to press U to unwrap, and that will do for now. Once I've unwrapped all the pieces, I'm going to join them all together and unwrap them all on the same UV square so that everything gets textured the same. Next, moving on to the railway pins, it's similar to with the sleepers. I'm just deleting everything apart from one set, and then I'm just going to copy them over. This face on the bottom is going to be facing the railway sleeper, so you're not going to be able to see it, so I can delete that face. Doing the low poly is all about just optimizing the topology you've got, so ideally you want all quads. It makes it better for if you've got anything deforming. Obviously you wouldn't with this model, but if you've got anything deforming in an animation, and just helps avoid shading issues in general. So with this I'm just using, I've got select sharp edges set to quick favorites, so I'm just using that and then adding or removing any additional edges I need. So I've done that for this set at the front, and then similar to the sleepers I'm just going to Shift D and move those along on the y-axis. And it's the same spacing as before, 61 centimeters. And then Shift R to repeat. And then if I select all and unwrap again, they'll all get placed in their own separate areas. As I have unwrapped a piece, I'll just hide it, just so I can work through in a sort of methodical way. So just mirroring this edge on the y-axis and the x-axis with expand on, and then I can collapse those edges, and it just removes one face. With this can be quadified in quite a simple way, just by adding in these two edge loops here, and it gives less faces than if you just cut straight across. So I'm just going to do that, mirror it on all axes, and then delete where the mirror put a seam down, an extra edge loop down the middle. Again, select sharp edges, and then just check that they're all in the right places. So I want that one that goes over the top, I want that to be one piece. So I can mark seams on all of that, and then just unwrap the whole thing. Hide that, and then move on to the next piece, the wheels. With the wheels, I want to make sure that this joins in with the wheel axle. So I'm just going to hide the wheels temporarily, and I want to shrink this in slightly just so that there's a separation between the wheel axle and the axle holders that will attach to the frame. I just need to go and find where the wheels are. That's that one there. And then I'm just going to join those together and work at them at the same time. You need to be careful when collapsing loops that you don't affect the silhouette too much. On the inside part of the wheels, you can reduce it by half. I'm just going to show you how to do that now. So if I select this edge loop on the wheel, and then I've got checker deselect on quick favorites, and then those individual edges, I need to use interactive tools and ring selection ring. And then if I just deselect the ones on the outer part where it's wider, that keeps these ones selected, and then I can press M and collapse. And then the inner part of this has less edge loops. Grid fill. I'm going to grid fill all of the cylindrical caps on the whole model. And with these two pieces, I'm going to boolean these together. The union. Delete these two faces, and then I'm going to bridge these together. Next, I'm going to boundary select and deselect that edge in the middle. Edge slide this all the way to there, and then merge by distance. Next, I'm going to select sharp edges and mark seams. I'm not sure why it's selecting that one. Maybe I might have just had that one selected already. So I'm just going to clear sharp on that one. Clear seam, sorry. And I just need to mirror this across. That's it. And then I'm just going to remove that edge in the middle. So you can see it reduces the edge loops on that part there. I'm going to add an extra edge loop around here, extra seam, sorry, and then an extra seam just from there to there, just so that unwraps in a nice strip. Also need one here. And here. Pay attention to where you're placing them. Obviously, a lot of these are going to be hidden by, say that one at the bottom is going to be hidden by the track. So think about logically where you're placing it. Those ones there are underneath, so you're not really going to get much of an angle on that if there are any sort of errors. We are procedurally texturing, so most of the seams will be hidden anyway. Once that's done, I'm going to put the old Auto Smooth modifier back on and the mirror modifier just to copy it to the back and apply that. Shading's gone weird, so I'm just going to redo that a second. That's it. Next, I can unwrap all of the pieces. And with this one, some of these are going to be slightly angled because they're not perfectly aligned to one axis. So I'm just going to select this piece, press L to select linked. And if you turn on display stretch, you can see there's no stretch on it at the moment, which is obviously what you want, but you will get artifacts because of the anti-aliasing when you texture this. So you want to straighten these pieces out. I've got a free add-on called UV Squares, which is great for just aligning these strips of quads to the grid. So you just select them and then to grid by shape. There are some later this doesn't work on, and if that's the case, just let those ones be. Next, I'm going to use UV Packer just to pack those all into the UV square. Okay, that's the wheels and the wheel axles done. They can then be hid. Next, I'm going to do these pins, which are there to hold the wheels onto the wheel axles. So I'm selecting the looper face around the middle. invert the selection and delete the caps on the ends. And I'm just going to grid fill all of these. So I'm just selecting the loop on the end of each of these cylinders, and then just grid fill, which I've got set to F. I have grid fill set to F just because it's quicker to do that. I have right click and N if I want to just add a solid face to something. Just adding in the seams, mark seam, select everything and unwrap. Nice and easy. Hide that part. Next is these bolts. And I do want to bake on all the beveled edges of these as if the backs are there, although I am going to be deleting them, purely for the fact of I want there to be a sort of noticeable bit of shading where it comes into contact with the actual frame for the cart. So just adding in one extra edge across the face just to create quads. You could argue these pieces are so small that it's not worth doing, but I like to do it just so I know the whole model is quads. Certain software picks up on things like this, or doesn't like the fact that you don't have quad geometry. A lot of the sites like CG Trader, they have things that test whether your model is all quads or if you've got n-gons or non-manifold geometry and things like that. It's always better to have the cleanest topology you can. Again, mark seams and just unwrap everything. Onto the sides of the cart. So we can delete 3/4 of this. And I'm going to be joining these pieces together. So the axle holder underneath onto the frame above. Now I'm just going to select all of this and invert the selection. And there's a face here underneath the thing. And I'm just going to delete that. Let's delete this edge. And I'm not sure if you saw me do it, but I've snapped the origin point to halfway between these two objects on the y-axis, so that when I come to mirror it, I can work on one half of this, mirror it across, then reset the pivot, and then mirror it across to the other 4 corners that we deleted earlier. Just adding an extra loop. Next, I'm going to join these pieces together. And I'll delete these faces underneath. And I'm just going to add in edge loops and then snap them into place where they'd meet up with these pieces. With the ones at the end, I'm just going to create a face, grid fill those to the end of the iron beam there. So I select this loop and press F to grid fill. With this end, I'm just going to extrude it to the end, scale it to 0 on the y-axis, and then snap it to the end of that piece, and then just merge all the verts. And I worked on that side. The other side hasn't been done yet. I'm just going to select these down here and collapse. Oh, hold on, sorry, 1 second. Just those bits in the middle. Collapse those. Gets rid of a whole row of faces there. And then from the side, I can do the same here. Just making sure not to select those ones in between. You could arguably do this further down as well to reduce the count even more, but I quite like it on a large flat face like that. And we can just mirror that across on the x-axis to fix up the other side. We don't need that edge loop down the middle that the mirror created, so we can delete that and inside that cylinder. Okay, so I'm just deleting those. Next, I'm going to select all the sharp edges and mark seams. These bits here can have those edges removed because that will curve around quite nicely. That unwrap fine without those selected. So just going to deselect those. Everything else is pretty much at 90-degree angles, and you just need one in the middle of that cylinder just to unwrap it. You probably won't see it anyway because the wheel axle goes through there. But it's just good practice to get in the habit of placing them in the least likely to be seen area. So that's all the seams marked, and then just going to apply all the transforms to reset the origin, and then mirror them across on the X and the Y. Apply the mirror, and then I can just re-add the auto smooth modifier, and we can delete that middle edge loop that's created with the mirror. A lot of people hate unwrapping. It's not actually too bad when you've got a model that's made with good symmetry like this. Obviously, the more complex the model, the harder it gets. And you can see there's no distortion on any of those UV islands, so that's a pretty good unwrap. Next, I'm going to do the A-frame. Just going to select this half and delete. Clear the sharp just temporarily. I'm going to grid select these and align them to the left, and then we can coplanar select those and delete them. You can't see this side anyway because it's flush against the other part of the frame, so that can be removed. You could join this to the frame, but I think it creates unnecessary geometry that we don't really need. With these loops, because we made them with an even number, we can delete every other one, and it doesn't really make too much difference to the silhouette. Just join these up, just 2 extra edges there, and then the same underneath. A lot of the topology is already quite good, so there's not actually too much unwrapping and low poly treatment needed for this. Just going to connect up this part, delete this face, and then I've got F2 tools. We'll just fill a face from an edge. That was one too many, we don't need that one. So I'm just going to select this loop, right click and in to add a face, and then just need an extra edge loop across there, and one from up there as well. That's all quads. Next, in face mode, I can select the relevant parts of this and then duplicate them to this side. So Shift D, snap it on the Y back here, and the face will be flipped because of the way it was facing. So I'm just going to right click, Alt N and flip, and then merge by distance. You can see it removes 23 verts, and that part's all fixed up. And then because the tow bar is in a different place, I'm just going to do the same thing for the back piece, do it all manually. Same procedure as before, it doesn't take long. So snap that, merge that vert to last, same with this one. And we can then delete that edge loop that goes around underneath. Same with this, every other loop we can remove. Just to simplify the geometry. And again, just add in a few edge loops just to make it all quads. Join this one, delete this face, and then build from this edge. Then refill the face and just add in those last 2 edge loops. Join those. And then again, in face mode, we can just copy that to the other side. So if we just delete this and select the faces here, then we get that top one in the corner, Shift D and snap it on the Y-axis, Alt N and flip faces, and then merge everything. Once that's done, we can mirror that back on the X-axis, rebuild the thing. I'm just going to re-add the auto smooth, the old auto smooth modifier, and then edit mode. I want to go into edge select. Do I need that edge there? Yeah, I'm just going to keep that, I think. So select sharp edges. And just going to have a look around the model, see if there's any that are worth deleting or deselecting. And I think I'm pretty happy with that. I think that's, I don't think there is any. I mean, these internal ones, they will smooth over when we come to texture it, but it's not the end of the world. So I'm just going to mark those as sharp. Then we also need one within this cylinder here. Mark that as sharp. And the same on the back. And you can see that the part with the distortion is that loop of faces that's the inside of that A-frame. So that part there. If you select it in the UV editor, it will highlight it on the actual model, so you can work out where you need to add in the seams. So I'm just going to add in these three here, these three edges, mark them as seams, and then redo the unwrap. And that should fix it up. You could do it as one piece, one long strip, but shorter ones in this case aren't going to hurt the model too much. Although these are a bit of an awkward shape, they might pack well together later on, so we won't worry about that for now. Next, onto these handles. I'm just going to delete the mirror modifier for the time being, just while we fix these up. Delete every other loop. Most of the geometry on these handles is already fixed from where we fixed the handle to the block. It's just these back pieces, these back edges we don't need, and the back faces on these bolts. These bolts have got an awkward number of sides, just because of the way I made them from the handles. I could change them out for hex bolts, but again, it's the saving of one face, so I'm not really going to bother with that, to be honest. Just add in the seams, and I just want one on the inside loop of the curved handle there. Once that's done, I'm going to mirror it across, U and unwrap. And the distorted part there is the handle, because it curves back on itself. But again, it's not the end of the world in this instance. The spheres we're using for the bolts on this frame we don't need, so I'm just going to delete those because they're just going to be baked as part of the normal map. And I've just separated these metal supports for the cart as their own, as their own object, because I'm going to separate it sort of by material. So we can have some parts going to be wood and some parts going to be metal, and some of the metal parts are going to be textured together because it's going to be the same metal. Okay, that's that. With these ones, they won't straighten out because they are facing the front on the y-axis, front and back. So I'm just going to leave those as they are. And then next on to the cart pivot. Now these, I want to separate these basically by how I'm going to bake them. So these 4 bolts, and the same on the back, I want to be one object. So I'm just going to separate those and then join these back together, and the same with the plates on the inside. And the same with these, they just need joining back together. And then these 3 parts are all, when I space everything out, it'll bake easier. it'll bake nicer for the beveled edges that we get from the high poly. With this, I'm going to use the same checker deselect trick to just do smart loop, and there's some of the loops here we can collapse into just fewer rings. So I'm just deselecting some of these ones here, all of these ones, not this one, and not this one, but I do want those ones in there. So now I can, now I've got those selected, I can press M and collapse. It does make a triangle, but it also reduces the geometry quite a lot. Delete this and grid fill, and the same on the back. That done, we can delete that and mirror it on the y-axis. Then I'm going to select sharp edges, and I'm going to deselect these two here. It will smooth this part over, but that's not the end of the world. Where that runs into the A-frame, you'd expect that bit to be slightly smoothed down just through wear and tear. So I'm just going to mark all of those as seams, and then I just need to do the vertical ones for the strips that go around the inner cylinders. So the least visible part of the model will be underneath for this part, for this piece. For this bit, it's going to need to go across a sort of jagged angle, just because this piece is slightly jagged. Not the end of the world. Okay, and I'm just going to mirror that again with the added seams and unwrap everything. And again, the only distorted part is the curved part, just because we're unwrapping it at a strange angle. These 4 bolts, similar to the bolts below, I'm just going to select the sharp edges. There's literally nothing too low poly on them, so I'm just going to add in an edge loop across there to make it quads on the end caps. Just selecting the verts on either edge and on either side, and just pressing J to add in that edge loop. Select all the sharp edges, mark seams. And then just going to mirror that across on the Y. Next, it's these internal plates, which are basically just boxes, so nice simple unwrap. Now with the handle, the way I want this to work, I want the actual bar bit you pull to be separate from the bit that joins it onto the pivot, so I'm going to separate these. And then this part I'm going to need to reattach to the pivot that we've just unwrapped. That's this part here. So just going to select these. And you can see there's internal faces on this piece. So I'm just going to isolate these. You can see the internal faces there. In top view, I'm just going to select all of these faces and then just grow the selection and invert. It's often the quick way to select something if you only need one small part and you can't see it easily. So I'm just going to select those loops and just move them back slightly on the y-axis. And the reason for this is because we're using the Bevel Shader. because they now intersect, they will kind of join together on their own. Just deleting those extra edges in there. If we were using a sub-D workflow, we'd want all these extra edges as support loops or for creasing, but we don't really need them in this case. So all of these ones I'm going to merge into the corner, and the same this side. So shortest path select that vert, shortest path select to the corner, and merge at last. Just going to mirror that on the Z axis. Okay, join these pieces together. Next, I'm going to work on this handle. And I'm just going to shrink it in slightly, excluding the Z axis, just so it doesn't touch that part that's holding it. It's purely so that if the bevel shader doesn't think it's part of it and sort of merge them together, or try and merge them together. And I just want to put the pivot point in the middle of this piece. Oh, and I didn't add the seams for these parts, so I'm just going to shift select these loops, select mirror on the Z, expand to select the bottom ones as well, and then mark seam. And we also need one on the inner face there, for that cylinder, and at the bottom. So just going to select and mark seam, and then just unwrap it with that extra part of the model joined to it. Okay, that part's done. Again, just going to finish up on this handle now. So delete that cap and grid fill it, and same at the top. Select the sharp edges and mark seam, and then we just need to add in an extra one, ideally behind where the lever would face, so in the direction of the cart, so this side. So one here, one here. We don't need them on this part here because it's going to be a flat circle when it unwraps. If something's perpendicular to an axis, you don't need a seam on it, basically. Okay, mark seams on those. And we've just got these two curved pieces. So as before, I'm just going to see if I can use UV squares to snap those. Just turn off the UV sync. Select that again. So yeah, just going to do that with those. This piece won't do that well, I don't think. That's probably better left as it was. So I'm just going to leave that where it is for now. Average island scale, and then UV packer just to pack them all into the square. Okay, that will do for the handle. And then the last piece is the cart itself. And I'm just adding in a mirror modifier just so it cuts. Gives me an edge loop on the X and Y axis. So I can delete 3/4 of the model and just work on one part of it. So deleting this and deleting this part here. So I want to join these planks to the ones on the edge. So I'm just going to select these middle. So deselect these so I can select the end faces that are flush with the planks on the sides. And then I want to add in edge loops here. To do that, I'm going to use the knife tool from above. So let me redo that. So K, A, and C, and enter. Right click and then do it again, because I want 2 of these. And then from above, I want to select all of this edge loop and snap it to the bottom of the end piece, and then this one to the top part of the end piece, just so it lines up perfectly with where those are. We don't need it on the bottom plank because that's not going to be joined. And then we just need one here, snap to there, and that will give us verts in all the right places to merge everything together. Just going to remove these faces here, unhide, and merge by distance. And you can see that we've moved 16 verts, and that's all now joined together. Mirror that all back over. Just going to edge slide these up into the corner. Do another merge by distance, and then remirror. This edge along the top we don't need, but the one going downwards we do. So I'm just going to leave that where it is. And then from the top, the one in the direct middle of it, we don't need that either. And then the ones going down the centre of the end planks we don't need either. So this one, and this one, just select these loops and delete them. The one on the bottom plank we do, because that's holding the point that goes down here. So select that loop. I'm going to deselect the vert at the top of it, and that just gives me the ones at the bottom. And I'm just going to push that down so it intersects ever so slightly with the planks at the bottom, because I do want this to create a bevel. Next, select by sharp edges, and right click, mark seam. Okay, that's good. I'm just going to check how that looks in the unwrap. So, yep, everything's unwrapped fine and there's no distortion. And this piece here is obviously because these are now joined together and the gaps are in the same place, that whole bit is unwrapped as one, which is fine. As long as it's not distorting or visible, I don't mind. So that's everything unwrapped and low polyed. Next, I'm going to select all of the low poly and join it together. And re-add the auto smooth modifier. And as I go into edit mode, you'll see the UVs look like an absolute shambles. I'm just going to select everything and do average island scales. And then with UV packer, I'm just going to click the pack button a few times until I get it to this average percentage size here is how much space you're wasting in the UV. So I'm just going to click it a few times, and I know that 78% is about as good as I can get for this because I've already done it a few times. So I don't need the UV editor anymore. So just right click and join that pane back together. Next, I want to separate these into the parts I'm baking them by. So I want to bake the rails separately, the sleepers, and so on. So just selecting from the side view here, just so it doesn't intersect with any of the rest of the model. And I just want all these pieces to be their own part. So just selecting the wheels and the axles are going to be one part because they've been joined together. Next, all of these wheel pins, because they're not touching, they won't intersect anyway. Next, the cart sides, separate by selection. These bolts, again, just L. I've got select link to set to L. So just selecting those, and then P, separate by selection. In the A-frame at the front and the back. These wooden parts of the frame that go around the cart. Pivot and the part that joins onto the handle. Bolts for the pivot. Handle. Then these handles. Oh, sorry, let me just select the bolts on the opposite side of that as well, because they can stay together. That just leaves me with the cart. Oh, and the plate. So I'm just going to select the plate and separate that as its own object. And now everything should be separated how I want it to bake. Just going to apply all the transforms. And next I need to do, the high body is already separated, but I do want to join the wheels to the axle. So just going through checking all these pieces are joined together. This part isn't, so I want to separate these the same way they're separated for the low poly. And then I also want to join these parts of the handle onto the pivot. So I'm just going to separate those and then join them onto this. Separate these plates as well, and these metal parts away from the cart. They can stay as they are, because as I say, they're just going to be baked as normal data onto the metal frame. And other than that, I think that's all of the parts of the high poly separated. Back on the low poly layer now, I'm just going to go into the shader editor, and we're going to start working on the bevels for the individual parts. So the way I do this is I like to make the first material. It's going to be 4 materials. So there's going to be 2 woods, one for the sleepers and one for the cart, and then 2 metals, one for the rails and the rail pins, and then one for all of the other metal parts, which is basically everything on the cart. So in rendered view, and I've just got a new material set up and working on the sleepers first. So I'm just going to give this a colour. Doesn't matter what colour. Although I'm also going to be using this as the colour ID. So I do want these to be quite easily distinct from each other, because I'm going to be making masks for them in Photoshop. So just connecting up the bevel shader, and you can see that's way too much at 0.5. So I'm going to drop that down slightly. And to save keep setting the same thing up, I'm just going to copy it over to the rail pins, click the little number next to it to make it a separate item, and then we can make it a separate colour and increase the metal so we know what part it is. So I'm just going to change the colour. Actually, we don't want to put the metal on for this at the moment, for the reason that when we come to bake it, the metal will reflect, and it will mess up the baking. Okay, so that bevel was too big, so we need to reduce that down. 0.1 seems fine, and I want the I think I want the same one on this part as well. So these are both going to be metal 1, and when we procedurally texture them, they're going to have the same material on them. The only difference might be the bevels. So I'm just putting the metal on the next part, which is the wheels. And through trial and error, I already know that this is going to be a 0.2, and so is the frame of the cart. So I'm just going to assign that, and they'll all get the same bevel size on these pieces. And I'm just going to change the colour to do something noticeably different. And the good thing about this stage is because you've got the bevel shader on there, it starts picking out the finer details of what's on the model and how the model is going to look. So this one, I want it separate from the other bits of metal. It's going to be the same colour, but the bevel is going to be a 0.01. And quite a few of these other parts are also going to be a 0.01, so I'm just going to add those in now. I've already sort of trial and errored this before videoing it, so I know which pieces I'm going to add to this part. And keeping them the same colour makes it very easy when you're making the masks as well. And this one, again, I'm just going to make it its own object, make it its own material, sorry, and then just change this down from 0.01 to 0.005. And this is basically all the bolts and all the really small pieces. So the bolts on the side of the frame, the pins on the wheels, and the axle holders underneath the cart. And then the back plates here for those bolts that hold the handles on. For these parts here, I'm going to use the same colour, but this part doesn't need a bevel shader on it because there's nothing for it to bevel. So I'm just going to delete that and leave it as it is. Okay, last part is this wood for the cart. So I'm just going to use start with applying the same wood that's on the railway sleepers, make it its own material, and then just change the colour. And then next, we're just going to adjust the bevel radius down. 0.1 seems to work fine for this. Back in shaded view, we can join this area back together. We don't need that shader editor anymore. So I'm just going to explode the model, and I'm just going in, and on the high poly, I'm just moving railway sleepers down 0.1 on the z-axis, the pins 0.5, and so on, just separating the parts of the model so they don't intersect or overlap. And this is so we can get a nice good bake of all those bevels. And then we're going to be doing the same for the low poly in a minute. So I'm just moving these in the X, Y, or Z directions, either minus or plus, just a few units, just so it's quite easy to remember. So when I go on the low poly, I'm just going to make a duplicate of this quickly because we're going to be using that for the cage. Sorry, not the cage. We're going to keep one low poly put together, and I'm going to use one exploded version for the baking. And then we're going to make a cage from the non-exploded, from the exploded one afterwards. So again, just doing the same movements on these. These ones 0.5 down, the wheels over 0.5, these 0.5 the other way, and just moving the main parts that would cause a problem. The difference might be very negligible in some areas, but it's worth doing. Joining these back together, and I'm just going to make a duplicate, right click, and move them to the scene collection. and this is the one we're going to turn into the cage. So I'm just going to turn off the exploded low poly layer and rename this new low poly the cage. And then I'm going to add in a material and just change the viewport display to red. And the reason for that is because I want to grow the cage so it's bigger than the high poly. So I've just added, re-enabled the high poly layer. And now I'm going to select the individual parts of this and use shrink fatten, which I've got set to Shift-Alt-S, to just grow the cage slightly bigger, very slightly bigger than the high poly. And making them different colours makes it very easy to just tell when it's overlapping it. Holding Shift for very precise increment changes on these. Just pressing L to select these items. Okay, that's that. For the rails, same with these, just pressing L to select them. I'm just going through piece by piece because with some pieces you might get a bit where there's a strange corner and you need to adjust it manually. Most of this model's fine though. It's quite a straightforward model, the way we've modelled this. And where we took some of the edge loops out of the tow bar, it means it will take a little bit more for the cage to overlap it, because that's one of the areas of the silhouette that we have actually changed. Next, the large cart frame sides. One thing to note as well, if you do get a situation where the cage is expanding in the wrong direction, you probably have flipped faces. So just hide the layer that's overlapping and check your face orientation. Face orientation and not applied transforms are the cause of most problems in 3D, or at least in Blender. And the reason we do it like this is because it creates a nice evenly expanded cage over the model. With these, they need to be pushed out a bit further to cover those UV spheres that we're using for the bolts on the side. And I find that this method, making the cage and that, although it's a lot of extra steps, it just gives a really good result in the end. If you're using something like Substance Painter, you don't need to bother with any of this. Unfortunately, I don't have access to Substance Painter at the moment. I am thinking of getting it though. Let's see how I feel about that once I've figured out the licensing for it. So there is some intersecting there, so we will get some errors, but those errors are going to be in a place where it's completely unnoticeable. Normally you would want to join all the high poly pieces back together as well, because it makes baking faster. But I've tried it several times, and every time I try and join them all together, Blender crashes, so I'm just going to leave them all separate. So select all of those, and then the low poly exploded last. And we're under the bake settings. And I'm splitting the view, so I've got a image editor at the top and shader editor at the bottom. And because the low poly exploded is the last selected, that's the one we're going to add the material to. So we're going to add a new image, first one being the normal. Drag over these values and ×4 to make a nice 4K texture. Zoom out just so we can see it. And then we're going to add that into here. Image texture is at the top if you just use the search. Change it to the normal map we've just made and change it to non-color. With the margin size, we want to change this back to 16 or we do get noticeable seams. I'm just going to pause the recording while that bakes, and when you have finished baking, make sure you save the image, because if you don't, it will be removed when you close Blender. And then next we're going to do the same for the color ID. Leave it at 4K. Doesn't matter too much at this stage because it's just for creating a mask, but we do want it to be quite neat. Same with this one, and this one can stay as colour because we actually want the colour information. Select all these pieces and change it to diffuse, and I've already disabled the direct and indirect on this, so it's just the colour information that we want. And then we can bake that as well, and just skipping ahead on the video to where that bake's completed. Again, remember to save out the image, and then over in Photoshop or whatever editor you want to use, you can open up that, and we're going to make 4 masks from this. You do actually only need 3 of them, but what you can also do is, because 2 of them are metal, the metal parts of the model, you can just use those masks, combine them together, and then you don't need to bake out the metal when we finish texturing. Again, it's probably 1,000 times easier if you've got something like Substance Painter or Simple Bake. But I don't tend to have any paid add-ons at the moment for my tutorials, as I just feel like it's an extra step I'd need to explain to people. So just going through, colour selecting each of the colours from the colour ID, making them white, flip the selection and make it black, and then save it out, delete that layer, and then do it all again for each colour on the model, on the colour ID. So invert the selection, invert the colour as well, paint that part black, and save it out. I tend to use PNGs for everything, just because they're good quality. I know a lot of people use EXRs in the game industry. I don't really know the technical difference at the moment, to be quite honest. That's probably something I'll learn as I go. Again, same with this part. Paint that part white, invert the selection, paint that part black, save as, and just save it as another mask. Mask 4. Okay, back in Blender. We can then set this shade tree up, ready to texture in the next part. And I'm just going to hide everything that's unnecessary. And all we want is the low poly model that's put together. So just going to select that, apply all the transforms once it's all joined together. And I might as well use this one and just make this the low poly material. Just going to delete these out temporarily, or the color ID anyway. The principal BSDF, I'm going to duplicate that, so we've got 4 of them. And then I'm going to add in mix shaders between all of them. Just move this over slightly. So if you select 2 of these and press Ctrl-0, with no triangular, it will add on a mix shader. And then I'm just going to duplicate that for these parts. And this will go into the top shader on the one below, and so on, all the way down the chain. And then the last one goes into the output. For the factor, we're going to then add in image textures and add in the masks that we've made. Make sure you set it to non-color. Well, I don't actually think it matters if it's non-color or not, because you've only got 2 colors in the mask. And I'm just setting all the principled BSDFs to very different colors, just so I can check that it's actually working and we are getting that material separation. Because sometimes if you set these up in the wrong way, you'll find that one of the parts isn't letting you texture it. So just adding all these in as the factors, and then we just need one more for the last one. I'm going to swap over into rendered view, just so you can see we've got all the different colours. So we've got the red, the pink, the blue, and the green, and that's ready for procedural texturing in the next stage. Hope you found this useful. This was a long setup file, so if you've stuck with it, well done. The procedural texturing is a lot more fun in my view. Oh, and just last thing, I'm just going to add in the normal map, and I'm just going to plug that into all 4 of the principal BSDFs. We'll be doing one more bake once we finish texturing, and I'll see you in the next part. Thanks for watching, and take care.